Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. I'm Danny Johnson, and this week, Stacia and I have the opportunity to talk to Christine Crouch, who's the Senior Director of Learning at General Mills. We've been trying to get on our podcast for, not kidding, an entire year, and we were super excited that the timing finally lined up. The conversation was interesting throughout, but there were three major things that stood out to me. The first one was that she made a really strong case for centralization. She laid out probably one of the clearest cases that we've ever heard. Right now, a lot of organizations are wrestling with centralized or decentralized or federated, and we're seeing that in our research every day. In fact, we're doing a project on that right now. Her case for centralization was for sure a little bit of efficiency, but that wasn't really the headline. Christine laid out one of the clearest cases I think I've heard for centralizing L&D. We're in the middle of a study right now where we're talking to a lot of organizations wrestling with, or should we be centralized? Should we be decentralized? Should we be federated? And the arguments for each. For centralized, there's more efficiency. For decentralized, you're closer to the business and the challenges of the business. And yes, she's going centralized and she did mention efficiency, but her real argument, the real reason that she's doing it, centered more on decision-making power and better data. So centralization gives her a better, stronger, unified view of learning activity in the organization, but also the needs that the business units have. And that matters a lot because as AI accelerates, strong data is what's going to allow us to figure out what the people actually need to know versus what can be offloaded to the robots. So she framed centralization not as cost-cutting, but as strategic infrastructure, I think, for a future of work, which I thought was really interesting. The second point that she made was one that is near and dear to my heart. We've been talking for a really long time about L&D's metrics, mostly focusing on justifying their existence. She doesn't do that. She focuses mostly on metrics that actually tie to business outcomes. So our team partners closely with the people analytics function in their organization to identify the outcomes that the business cares about. And then they take a lot of care to understand the correlations between what they're doing and what those actions are that the organization is trying to drive. It's more of a grown-up process for sure that we're seeing in a lot of organizations. And she was quick to say, we haven't got this all figured out, and we totally understand that. But the fact that they have stepped in that direction, where they're actually looking at the metrics that the organization cares about, is huge. Her attitude seemed to be, if L&D wants influence, it has to speak the language that the business wants and prove that there's actually meaningful impact associated with that. The last thing that stood out to me in this interview with Christine was the role of the learning business partner. So the function is centralized, obviously, but they have this role called a learning business partner that operates very similar to what an HR business partner would. So there you have a centralized L&D function, but then they have these people that are matrixed to the leadership teams of the business functions as well. And because they sit with the functional leadership teams, they are able to bring insight into how to solve problems, but they're also able to bring back to the centralized L&D department priorities and pain points and strategic shifts that they see happening. It's a sort of a tight feedback loop that we haven't seen in a lot of organization, and it kind of keeps L&D connected to the reality, but also able to leverage things across the organization that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. It was an outstanding conversation, like all of these are. It was thoughtful. It was really practical. She is very articulate, and it was packed with lessons for anybody that's trying to sort of rethink their learning operating model. So give it a listen. Welcome, Christine. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We've had the opportunity to talk a couple of times this year. You participated in some of our research and shared some kind of innovative things, which is why I wanted you to talk to our larger membership and community. Just maybe to get us started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I am currently in Minnesota. I work for General Mills. But a little bit about me, I started my career in New York. My best friend and I, out of college, decided to take one big leap, and we moved there, even though I had never been to the city in my life, and I had no money and no job, and it was quite the leap. But I often tell people it was one of the best learning experiences of my life and really jump-started my career in a big way. So I spent about 10 years in New York, and I got my career started at Dior in the beauty industry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there I really navigated marketing and retail development, but ultimately landed in learning and fell in love with it because it was a really good essence of my education, which is in journalism and French. And so I had this French brand and I had the components of journalism that I loved with broadcast and writing and all of that. And then there I met my husband and he and I got married in New York. And then we had the job opportunity to go to Chicago, he with his company at the time. And then I had an opportunity at Kraft Heinz, just a completely different career pivot. So it was quite interesting, but also a pretty tremendous learning experience as I joined them post the Kraft Heinz merger. And so that was really interesting as well. I had my 2 kids in Chicago. And then a few years later, the General Mills opportunity came up and I moved here about 6 years ago and have been here ever since. And the evolution has been pretty remarkable, but I'm very grateful that I'm here. It's a great company and a great place to be.
Very cool. I think many people who listen probably know what General Mills is, but for those folks who don't, can you give a little bit of background on the company?
Yeah. So General Mills is, over 160 years old. It's really a legacy company of really incredible brands. So Cheerios and Pillsbury, Totino's, Betty Crocker, just to name a few. Those that are pet parents might love Blue Buffalo and some of those brands. We're global with, very predominant business in North America company and expanding in global areas, both from a talent and a brand perspective. And really a rich culture, a lot of, deep connections in the Midwest, of course, but we really have built a company that is really centered on people and purpose. And that's been really special to be a part of.
So how long have you been at General Mills?
I came here in 2019.
Okay, so you've been there about six-ish years.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have a headline, like how much has L&D changed or what has changed in L&D from the time you started till now?
It's a pretty dramatic change. I would say the headline is from deeply decentralized and siloed to centralized and integrated. And really that last bucket of centralization just happened in the last few months.
So why has that transition happened over that time? Like what's been kind of the business problem that you're trying to solve with making that shift in structure?
Yeah, a few years ago, as part of our HR long-range plan, we kicked off an initiative called Transform Learning. But if I can back up a little bit further, even when I joined 6 years ago, I was hired by our chief marketing officer to build marketing capabilities, which is a really exciting time. General Mills is a is a company of brands, and we pride ourselves on having really best-in-class marketers. When I joined and I looked around, I noticed that there were multiple learning professionals and teams just in marketing. And so initially we started to bring together the ways of working for some of those folks. But then, what happened around that time is e-commerce really started to grow for the food industry. We started thinking about holistic capabilities across the organization, like strategic revenue management, e-commerce, and others that really spanned across multiple functions. And so I would say the story of General Mills from decentralized to centralized is it's really driven by capability and skill needs and this desire to make sure we integrate how our talent learns across the functions, not just from an efficiency standpoint, but really from how the business operates. We want them to be able to, have common language, common skills, common knowledge around these things so that we can move with speed and really also make sure that our talent, especially as they move across the organization, is able to maintain that common core learning. And that only grew. We eventually launched a digital pillar that, of course, had impact across the organization. Leadership has evolved where it was like, it's not just about how do you lead people, but it's like, how do you lead a capability? How do you lead transformation? How do you lead organizational growth? And the way that the functional capabilities were overlapping with some of these enterprise, both behaviors and soft skills, was becoming really evident. And so over time, it's been, it started really organically. And then a few years ago with that long range plan, we really put a stake in the ground that we want to really look at how learning operates. What is our operating model? How should we work more effectively with our businesses? What does that translate to for a technology roadmap and our analytics? You can kind of imagine how that went, how that spiraled and the opportunities that presented itself. And then certainly now, I know we'll continue to talk about the AI impact, and that's certainly something we're thinking about too.
So did that align with a re-centralization of the broader HR organization, or was it just focused within learning?
It was really focused in learning because when you looked at the priorities that stood alongside that HR long range plan, it was things like building our future fit skills, including digital. It included deep focus on change and belonging. And there's so many components of learning that are core to those tenets. And so we really just wanted to make sure that we were well equipped to support both the HR and then really the broader business priorities. I would say one of the superpowers of our learning organization is that we're really able to see across in a unique way at General Mills, and our ability to see what was being prioritized across and where there was synergy not only made our learning more efficient, but it actually was able to drive some really good relationships across the businesses.
I have a lot of questions. I want to start with maybe this one. So centralization is a scary thing for a lot of organizations. We're seeing it happen a lot in the learning functions right now because of the efficiency play. But you specifically said it was a part of the reason that you made this decision, but not necessarily the main reason that you made this decision. What were the main reasons? What were the pain points you were trying to solve by going centralized?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. One, I actually want to give one preface that I think is important we talk about today is that while, yes, we are centralized, we make a really concerted effort to make it not feel like a centralized organization. And part of that is a model that we've got where we have learning business partners that sit on the functional and segment teams. And we really work hard to make sure that those leaders feel part of the function segment team. They get their direction from those leaders. That is their point person. And the benefit of centralization in terms of reporting structure is that we can all come to the table and compare notes and understand what's happening in the business in a deeper way and really connect dots that, we hadn't always been able to do in the past. So I totally understand why centralization is important. And one of the things that I've shared as a leader is it's really important as we start this new model that people don't feel like they're losing something with the centralized model. And so the goal is that that doesn't feel different to the actual business stakeholders. So certainly I would say connecting the dots and making sure we had our pulse on the business capability and skill development needs across was significant. We were delivering programming that was very consistent in different formats and in different ways across functions. I would also say that I'm really passionate about the power of peer learning and cross-functional learning. And so we've developed, over time, a lot of cohort-based learning that really brings together across functions. And for us, as we've mapped out our leader development journey and other capabilities, we found that we really need to build enterprise acumen and cross-functional knowledge in ways that we haven't had to before. And so the benefit of us, again, all being together is we're able to really design those programs to not only meet the specific need, but to also meet some of the enterprise goals. And then efficiency, let's be honest, that is part of it. And there are certainly efficiencies to be found as we think about a longer term tech roadmap and then ways of working. So it's a benefit, but I would say that it's one of many.
Kind of maybe not a follow-up, but tangential to this. It sounds like your organization, your L&D organization is credible and effective. And those two things often don't happen to L&D functions. And so I'm wondering, what do you all do to get there? Like, has it always been that way? Has General Mills always said, learning and development is really important to our organization? Or what do you do to sort of maintain those relationships and make sure you have what you need in order to move forward?
Well, I definitely want to give credit where credit is due. General Mills leadership team has always been significant sponsor of learning. And that's from our CEO and our CHRO, I would say is a pretty strong advocate of learning and sees the value of that investment. So I want to start there. I would say from an effectiveness standpoint, that learning business partnership is really important. And sometimes when I have external benchmarking calls, people will say, hey, this program I launched, I can't get people to take it. I can't get adoption. And what do you do? And I often will ask things like, did they want or need it in the first place? Are you pushing it or are you getting pull? And we try really hard to make sure that we are getting pull from them. They have a distinct need. We work very intentionally to make sure that our programs are leader sponsored so that this is not the learning org who's pushing out this initiative. This is a leader sponsored initiative. And so the business facing promotion of learning is really important to me. I don't want my team doing anything that the business doesn't think is going to drive performance for the business. And then certainly once I've delivered that, I can go in and influence more credibly where I think we should go from a talent development perspective. And I think building that relationship and credibility with a business is the thing that is working for us really hard.
One of the arguments against centralization is challenges around making sure you are close enough to the business to understand those business needs and the like. So how do you balance this, and how much of this is maybe reliant on older pre-existing relationships? Because I know General Mills tends to have long tenure, so people kind of really know each other. So how much of this is kind of like relationship-based versus like structure-based, or things that you teach folks so that they can remain close to the business?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I would comment on that. The profile of the learning business partner, I think, is really important. So while on my team, I certainly have a mix of pure learning professionals who kind of grew up in their trade, and then I have those that are really new or coming from the business. For a strategic learning business partner, what I'm finding more true than not is having somebody who's got the business experience and who's coming from the business offer some pretty instant credibility. And so what I need a learning business partner, I need them to know how to performance consult. I need them to know how to align a plan, how to make sure they've got the right stakeholders and subject matter experts involved. I don't need them to be an expert on the tenets of L&D. I need them to really know, like, what problem are we trying to solve and where are we headed from a business standpoint? So I think that's one of the core ways that I would say we get credibility. And that isn't necessarily that I would say I or my team trains. That is something that we hire for. And I think that's really, really important. I can certainly, in certain functions, I can train them with business partners on how to better understand the function if I wanted to get an L&D professional. But it is much easier when there's a space like marketing, for example, or supply chain, when you've got somebody that has the depth of knowledge and who can come in and understand what the pain points are, what the opportunities are, it really just is a game changer for how you get learning pushed through in meaningful ways.
So it almost sounds like they've got consulting capabilities, like they're the same sort of person that would be hired for a consulting firm. So is that what you're looking for when you go out? Or you're like, we need a consultant that has lots of experience in marketing that also wants to do learning? Or how do you sort of like figure that out?
So we've tested a couple things. There's a couple people on my team that we hired directly from the business that wanted a rotation and a new experience. And so they came in with the subject matter expertise. Certainly, in some cases, we have people who are naturally good at that performance consulting, but we have also invested a lot of time as a learning org on upskilling our team on performance consulting. And so I had a brilliant colleague who was here a while back, and he really went all in on performance consulting. And we spent a lot of time at that learning business partner level, making sure we had the right skills so that we could really understand not only the problem to solve, but we really could tease out the direction that our leaders wanted us to take with our learning programs.
So not being the learning person here, I'm a little bit less familiar with the learning business partner model overall, and particularly how it kind of intersects with the HR business partner model. So can you explain, for those of us for whom this is not our natural home, a little bit about that model, and then tie that back to the centralized system and how that all kind of comes together?
Yeah. So I would say for the most part, my leadership team are learning business partners, and they also sit and have a dotted line on the team of the HR business partner for the respective function or segment. And so if I am an HR vice president and I am over, North America or finance, included on my leadership team is a learning business partner. And so really it's a joint contract that we've formed. That learning business partner sits at the table and they understand not only the HR strategy, but they're involved in business plans. They're involved in forming the priorities for that function or segment. And they really act as a participant. So just as if you had a decentralized model with a learning professional on that seat, it's the same type of relationship. It's just that when they leave that meeting, they come back to the table of our centralized structure. And that's where we're really able to make sure that we have continuity where it's appropriate. We also have many cases where there is a lot of functional depth and it's not integrated with the full, and that's okay. The goal is that we serve the business first, and we make sure that we have meaningful opportunities for broader enterprise and talent development where it spans across.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
I want to ask a question that I know Stacia would ask if she knew that it was a possibility. When we did our pre-call, we talked a lot about data. We talked about how centralization was going to provide a better data pool to make better decisions. I'd love for you to talk just a little bit about that and maybe what you can do now that you couldn't before and what kinds of data you're looking at and all the things.
Oh, that's a great question, Danny. And I would say that we're really in the thick of forming that right now, because for context, we centralized a few months ago. And so we've kicked off a quarterly learning review where we're really trying to aggregate our data. And we're trying to take the approach similar to what we see happen in the business when they have business reviews, where we, make sure we have our priorities mapped on the page. We know generally if we're red, yellow, green, and then we have some of our core metrics to back it up. What I would say step one has been for the learning org is to make sure everything is in one place. And so again, because we were decentralized, we didn't have everything in our learning management system. We're at that point now where we're really trying to get that consolidated in one place so that we have clean data. So that's one. I would say the other benefit of this organization is that we sit on the global talent organization and we have an analytics team. With a centralized org now, we're able to really correlate our learning metrics across functions and segments to our talent metrics across functions and segments. We're really in our infancy and really getting after how those things correlate, but we're testing some of our biggest investments to try to understand, do we see correlation with what we invest in our top talent and our retention and performance? And how do those things correlate? Do we see correlation in our AI learning and our adoption with our D&T team? And so we're really starting to tease out what good measurement looks like. And I'm sure you both know it's a really hard journey, and our team is doing a lot of test and learning. And so right before this podcast, actually, I had a meeting with the leader on my team who has been running this. And we just really talked about we are in test and learn mode. Let's keep trying, see what is sticky, see where we need to continue to build out our data and go from there. And so very much a journey, but I think it's really promising where we can go with a centralized org.
This makes me so happy. Danny did know that this was exactly the sort of thing that would get me excited. So can I ask a few more questions about that? Yeah. So I know you're just starting it and just testing, but a lot of people, the people analytics or the data analytics folks and talent management and learning all sit separately. And there's just no conversation amongst them. So how did you get to this point?
Well, I have a great partner. So we have a head of analytics we're on the same leadership teams. I think the barrier up until now was just an understanding of what are we trying to measure and what are the opportunities. And we have had some pretty meaty enterprise priorities this year that span across talent development and learning. And the business. So I'll give you the example of AI adoption right now. We have some internal AI tools. We feel very strongly that our employee base will benefit from using these tools. Alongside that, we've had an AI Academy and course catalog that we're driving, and we wanted to see the correlation of who was taking the learning, how fast they were adopting the tools. And then we actually incorporated that in our talent dashboard that gets reviewed with our HR teams and our business team. So they're able to see alongside the metrics of retention and movement and talent, they're able to actually see that metric now. And that was really important to us because it was an enterprise priority. And so we're testing other things like what is the correlation of our leader development investments and retention and movement and promotion rates. And we're early stages, but now that we know what we're really targeting heavily across functions and segments, we have really clear enterprise priorities. Then we're able to get more clear with that team what we actually want to measure. And I would say that was part of the gap. When you've got a decentralized team, you're all thinking about different aspects of measurement. The data is in a variety of places. And so now that we're starting to bring this together and we're starting to see, hey, across functions, everybody's focused on these types of skills or capabilities. We're starting to get more clear on where there's opportunities to go deep on measurement. And, we've got a lot to learn. So by no means have we mastered this, but I'm feeling really excited about where we can go.
And then one of the big questions often is, okay, so you've measured something, but what are you going to do with this? And so is there kind of a plan for taking this investment in your high potentials and the impact on retention? Is there a plan for what you will do with this information afterwards?
Yeah, certainly that will be critical input for how much we invest, when we invest in the life cycle of an employee. It will certainly impact how we scale some of those investments. So, where we have a deeper investment in maybe a core leadership group that we want to target, if that works really well and we see a solid ROI on that, then that just will help us inform some of our future investments and decisions. And so, that's one. The other thing that I would say that my analytics partner has been really good about coaching me on is that we need to think hard about what our correlation could be to business results. And so I know we talk about that in learning, but I will say I have not yet been bold enough to say, like, yes, our brand building learning investment has resulted in better marketing and better sales. We haven't actually looked to see if there is a correlation there. And she does push me to say, like, hey, that's what happens in the business. They're able to correlate certain activities and investments to business outcomes. And I don't think we've really gone there more distinctly in learning yet. I want to try more of that in the future because I think that really amps up the impact that learning can have, not just from a talent development standpoint, but from a business growth standpoint.
And just one final question on this, and then I'll get off my analytics soapbox. But to what extent have your business leaders asked you for this? Like, are they asking for what's the relationship between these programs and marketing or some of these other efforts?
I would say that while they might not be asking me for correlation metrics, they are starting to ask more targeted questions on who's participating in the learning, how important is it to our business, which again, because of that model I indicated earlier, we don't really offer a lot of learning that they're not asking for. And so what they're asking is like, how effective was that program? What feedback are we getting? They're asking more maybe foundational learning questions. The goal is that if we can start to test some things like correlation or other bigger forms of measurement, the goal is that we'll just further gain buy-in on how we get investments, how we weave that into the flow of work or transformation. And so I think it can bring a lot of power in the future, but there's just so much for us to unpack right now that we're still learning. And I think that's a good thing. But I think we're like good early signs that we can do this. And I'm excited about that.
This makes me really happy too. Stacia does a lot of research on people analytics functions and the technology surrounding that. We have done specific studies in learning and development on metrics and measurement and those types of things. And you're the type of leader that I would love to see in every organization because you're not talking about ROI and showing your value. You're talking about how do we correlate this against business metrics to figure out how we need to adjust to make sure we're getting where we're going. I think that's super powerful. One more question before we go to our lightning round. And this is more of a conversation that we're hearing with organizations that are going centralized. How do you keep business units from slipping back into fragmented systems and particularly rogue purchases? We see all kinds of organizations that are like, that's a central group. I don't care. I have money. I'm going to spend it however I want. So how are you, as you're at the beginning of this, how are you thinking through how to control some of that?
Well, I would tell you that still happens. So for those listening, we haven't mastered a magical formula where that doesn't ever happen. But I would say it happens a lot less with the relationship we have directly with the functional leaders. The goal is that we have the vast majority together so that we can really reap the benefits of the centralized org. And I think, with everything coming up in the AI world, it's more important than ever that you've got that community who can help manage and govern some of these things in the future. And so it's not perfect, but I would say we try to keep a pulse on the onesie twosies that kind of come out there. And then at the end of the day, if it's a really duplicative resource, we can build a relationship and eventually bring it along. But more oftentimes than not, at least in these early days, it's for a very specific need. And my goal as the learning leader is not to hold them back from servicing the business. It's really to figure out how we can bring things together and optimize what we're investing in.
So let's move on to the lightning round. We want to get to know you a little bit more, Christine. So let's start with actually a really nice question, which is, what are 3 things that make you happy?
Well, my family makes me really happy. I have a daughter named Madeline, who's almost 10, and a son named Jack, who's 7. And my husband's name is Joe. We live in Chanhassen, Minnesota, and I am a very big advocate of Chanhassen. It's a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul, for those that are listening. But my team knows that I I have a lot of Chan pride. So my family makes me really happy, and my hometown right now makes me really happy. And then I would say the other thing that I'd highlight is I love gardening. That's a really big passion of mine. And, not to geek out, but I would say from a learning standpoint, there's like so much correlation to what you can learn about when you're a gardener. It's really like you test and learn and you see things grow. And sometimes you get something that destroys one thing, but then blooms in another place, and you have to pivot and you learn along the way. And I just think it's pretty magical. So that's something that I really love.
I love that. In Utah, we moved from Utah a couple of years ago, and in Utah, I grew flowers, so many flowers. In Michigan, I'm like, I could probably do vegetables, probably. And so I did a vegetable garden this year, and let me tell you, I learned what bottom rot was really fast and all kinds of stuff. Like it's a completely different game out here. So I completely hear you. I'm like, okay, well, we're going to do that next year too. The thing about gardening also is that there's plenty of time for reflection. It's not like an immediate correction. You got a whole season to think about how you're going to do it different next year.
Absolutely. That's true.
Tell us what you're binging on Netflix.
Yeah, so I got through the second season of Nobody Wants This, which part of the reason I love that is they're like short 20-minute episode. It kind of reminds me of how we used to binge watch Friends. It's like lighthearted, doesn't take a lot of mental load at the end of the day. So I've been watching that. And then I'm just starting season 2 of Man on the Inside, which I don't know if you've seen, but that was season 1 was so lovely. It was about an older man who was like a private agent inside of a senior home. And it was trying to like solve a mystery, but it became this like very heartwarming story about like relationships and overcoming loneliness and just like the vibrancy that you can have in certain parts of life. So I highly recommend it. It sounds maybe more heavy, but it's Ted Danson. It's very funny. Highly recommend. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love Tim.
I'm going to ask you, are you binge watching anything?
Yes. I'm embarrassed to tell you what we're binge watching right now. We're binge watching Matlock, strangely, like the new Matlock with Kathy Bates. When you watch them back to back, they're like, I don't know. It's really interesting. And it's really interesting because you see what a good actress she is compared to maybe some of the newbies that she's working with. She's a phenomenal actor. And so it's fun to watch. So that's what we're binge watching right now.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Kathy Bates is Matlock. And there's this whole sort of sub-story. I won't ruin it for you, but you should watch it. They're pretty good. They're in their second season. They've done, I think they were nominated for some Emmys and stuff. It's like, cool. It's serious. It's pretty good.
All right. I appreciate the recommendations. I'm looking for suggestions at the moment. So, all right, Christine, back to you. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up.
So I actually did grow up in Minnesota. I was in a suburb of North St. Paul. Prior to that, though, my family moved around a little bit when I was young. So I was actually born in Lubbock, Texas. And then I spent a few years in Fargo, North Dakota. Hopefully my accent doesn't give that away. But I did spend the majority of my childhood in Minnesota. And then after high school, I left for college, and I hadn't been back to Minnesota in about 20 years until I moved. I had been back to visit, but I hadn't lived here ever as an adult. So when it came for General Mills, it was pretty cool to experience Minnesota, but as an adult in totally different area of the state. But I'm a big fan of Minnesota. I think this is a great place to live.
Yeah, we were talking beforehand. There's something magic about the Midwest. We love it too. Our family loves it as well.
Yeah, even this -8-degree weather today.
I know, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, the second discussion we want to have with you, Christine, is about AI. In our prep call, we talked a little bit about what your philosophy was and stuff, and I'd like to dig in a little bit to that, especially because it feels like you've got all your ducks in a row with other stuff in the organization. We'd love to see how you're handling it with respect to some of the other very panicked L&D organizations that we're talking to right now. But maybe we start with your philosophy when it comes to AI.
First I would just say that I'm not going to pretend that I have a really polished AI philosophy. And in some ways, I think even when people do have a polished AI philosophy, it's changing so fast that my viewpoint and philosophies have changed on this over time. So I'll start there because I think it's important that I don't portray to have all of this figured out. I do have a point of view, though, and I think it's really important in the AI era that we all remember AI is not going to replace the human side of learning. It's going to elevate it. And I think in companies like General Mills that are people-driven, purpose-driven companies, humans are still at the forefront. So We are looking at AI to automate tasks. We're looking at it to personalize learning. We're looking, at it to make learning more accessible in the flow of work. And we're piloting what that is like. But AI can't fully replace what has been fundamental to humans and human development: connection to people, creativity, innovation, just the value of learning in community. We see so much rich value, not just for how people learn, but how our culture is built by bringing people together in a classroom to learn. And, that has been around for a very long time. And I think it will continue to be around for a long time.
We agree. We did our trends webinar earlier this afternoon, if you're on the West Coast, East Coast. And one of our trends this year is authenticity. This need to double down on the people and figure out what the people are doing versus what the robots are doing seems to be a trend that we're seeing. And so we can completely relate to what you're saying. There's something about that interaction that is magical and I think essential to development.
Yeah, I think it will really give learning professionals room to grow. So I do think that the nature of what learning professionals have to do is going to change. It already is, and we can see that. But I really think that the skills that are needed to succeed in an AI world, we're going to need more strategic and critical thinking than ever. We're going to need strong leadership to understand how humans and AI work together and make decisions. We're going to need to have strong process orientation. We're going to need to make sure that what AI is spitting out is good. And that does require people in the loop and humans in the loop of that. And so I think that companies that really recognize the importance of learning in this moment are the ones that are going to win. And do I certainly, anticipate there's going to be change? Sure. Sometimes does that make me anxious? Yes. But then I really think, I look around and I think the demand right now is higher than ever because everyone is trying to figure this out. And I don't think that everyone is going to magically, learn a couple of things about AI and then be done. This is just the start of a much bigger transformation. And I think we're really going to need learning in all of our industries to help guide people in their work.
The thing that strikes me about what you're saying is how rooted that is in what I think kind of the real outcome should be of learning, right? I think that when we talk to folks, and obviously Danny does this more than I do, but when we talk to folks, sometimes those who are most concerned, it seems like their fear is in, it's going to take away generating the content or generating the course or, all these things that we can kind of count versus the outcomes that we're trying to get to, which is, a more highly skilled workforce that can do the things we need to execute business strategy. One question I have, though, is as you're thinking about learning and learning methods in particular, are you starting to develop a way of thinking around what we should, when and how and where we should use AI-enabled employee development versus some of these more kind of traditional human-centric methods?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for a long time, we've been talking about learning in the flow of work, and AI is going to be a huge enabler of that. I mean, I'm sure General Mills is like other places where there was the proliferation of content in a lot of places, and it's hard to know where to go for what. And if you can now bring AI into the mix to get you faster answers to your questions when you need them the most, if you can get some guidance, like as you're doing the work, those are things that we're experimenting on right now. We're trying to figure out how that would fit in context of our academies or of the places where we house some of our learning. Like, can we train our AI in places so that it can really give people the answers they need more quickly? So I think that is going to be a game changer for learning in the flow of work. And I think that's really exciting. And it's going to require learning professionals who can really work with those tools in order to make them work well. And then I mentioned this before, I do think that AI can certainly be used to help develop content and develop our programming. And I still think the role of more traditional in-person learning plays a significant role, period. I just don't think that's going to go away. And it's a little, it makes me think a little bit of the blow up of e-learning, right? It was like, everything's going to transition to e-learning and now it's all on demand. And at least in my experience where I've been, there has not been just giant hunger to do everything in e-learning. People still want to be together. They still want to have discussion and reinforcement of what they're learning. So I think that's really important. And then the one other thing I will say that I think it's really interesting is we've been piloting coaching, AI coaching tools. Those have been really significant. And again, not to replace a coach when you really need deeper coaching and development, but to have just in time I'm going into a performance conversation or I'm having a difficult conversation, I need some quick guidance. That type of coaching support, I think, is going to really strengthen our leadership populations, really be seen as an added value, not to replace the human, but to really get some just-in-time support that, our managers and our leaders don't always have time for. And so these are really good tools that we can work with to help all of us.
So is it reasonable, as you're kind of thinking about these things, these different methodologies, to say, okay, much of this AI-based capability is probably more that, just-in-time support, flow of work, whatever language you want to use, whereas some of these other approaches may be kind of for this more deeper, bigger, if you will, human learning, like bigger kind of behavior change, not like behavior change around the tool or the actual thing you're doing in the moment, but kind of this bigger transition. Is that kind of a way that one might be able to think about it?
I absolutely think that's true. I think, where you need performance in the flow of work, this can really get you up to speed more quickly. I think, parts of onboarding, parts of day-to-day teamwork, I think can definitely speed you up and get you to where you need to go more quickly. But, even for myself personally, I've been involved in the last year in some training. I just had like a little refresher course yesterday on change leadership and some of the skills that are needed when you're in the thick of change and transformation. And I have to tell you, I could not do that, in an AI or even an e-learning course. I need my peers, I need my fellow participants to talk this out with me and to really critically think about what we're managing and how to work through it. And so I just think that's fundamental. I think it's been for all of time and it will continue to be. And so I guess I have a more optimistic view that way, where I think people will, might get further into this type of learning for a while. And then I still think we will come back to the roots of some of human nature and how we learn.
One of the tangential learning things that I had when we were doing the trends stuff this week is this idea of the importance of some of these softer skills that we've talked about for a really long time and the increase in importance of them. So we talk about AI being able to train people and AI coaches and all that kind of stuff. But increasingly, people are going to need to learn how to work with AI, and that's going to take different types of skills than we've ever had before. We're no longer like cogs in a machine. We're helping to determine whether the cogs in the machine are working correctly. And so there's higher judgment, higher ability to think critically, higher, like all of these things. And as I was going through it in the webinar, I was like, these are things that I'm not sure AI can teach you. Like, I think it can help you a little bit, but it takes the conversation with the human in order to do that. And so it almost feels like we're taking a step, I don't want to say back, but back into these sort of traditional ways of developing to develop the skills that we need in order to work with AI. And I don't know exactly how that's going to fall out, but it struck me today that these are deeply human skills that need to be sort of hashed out with other humans in order to work with the AI better.
I completely agree with you, Danny. I think that there are moments where if I want to get a quick perspective, on a topic, or if I want to get some grounding going into a meeting, I use AI all the time for that. And I think it's really helpful. But I really do believe that there is a reason humans fundamentally learn the way they do. And I think for us to be in a space where we think that's going to just completely be taken over by AI isn't quite right. And I think some of that, to your point, like we know as learning professionals, like learning takes practice and feedback and conversation. And yes, we can get some feedback and we can get some interaction with AI, but we're still at a phase where we actually need to be able to read a room. We need to be able to practice when it goes south, when, we need to be able to combine multiple skills together at one time. It's not always about learning one distinct skill. It's about, how do I understand how to build a strategy and execute a strategy while I also have data and analytics in my mind. And I'm also doing it as a leader. That's something that my team has talked a lot about too, is that, leader development, I think sometimes would get put into this little bucket, like, okay, I've got to learn to be a leader. And really what we're actively doing this year is saying like, no, you need to lead in an AI era. Let's put those together. How do we infuse our AI learning journey with our leadership development journey? And we do that in other pockets too, within the functions, where we want to make sure people understand that, you have to build these skills one over time with practice, and they're not in a silo. And so I think all of that complexity of how we need to learn in life and certainly in business, I think we can get tremendous support from AI. I think it can help us go faster. I don't think it's going to wipe out everything that we've fundamentally built as humans. So
I hope not. I really hope not.
me too.
So, Christine, you've mentioned a coaching tool just a few moments ago, and I imagine that there's other tools that you're piloting both kind of on the front end as well as on the back end. So can you tell us a little bit about how you're using AI within these tools and what you've found to be effective so far?
Yeah. So on the front end, we have an internal version of generative AI, ChatGPT, if you will, that we use internally so that it's protected. And we're doing a lot of work on the front end to make sure people understand, how to prompt. We have one of my team members who's brilliant, developed a prompt like a boss session. So we're really, but beyond that, we're working deeply to make sure people understand how to use the tool, how to use it effectively, prompting skills, leadership skills. So we've got that deep dive focus. And then I would say the other major forward-facing tool is powered by a company called Valent. The coaching tool is called Nadia. So I referenced that earlier, but we found that to be a really good pilot of how we can get AI coaching into the mix. And then I would say on the back end of learning and development, we have design tools that include, content development, translation, design that are multiplying the speed at which we can deliver. And it's really significant. So that internal Gen AI tool I told you is helping us to write our storyboards, our scripts, turn those around in record time. And then when we can put it into a design tool that can, really spit that out fast, it's just really maximizing what we can deliver to the organization. And because our volume is very high right now, we're able to do a lot more than we would be able to on a faster timeline. So that's really exciting. And then we're starting to test the power of agentic AI and agents. And so there's a lot of pilots in the background right now. We're so early in this that I'll have to come back to you with how that goes, but really just, testing how they would work internally on the tools we use in the learning organization so that we can get comfortable with them before we try to, help the organization adopt them in the future. So we're just scratching the surface there, but I think there's some really interesting ways that we're starting to test and learn. And I would say that our D&T organization is just doing some really cool pilots all around. And so one thing that I think is really important for learning is to really build close partnerships with your D&T organization, because we want to be a part of these pilots and how they're being embedded into the organization so that we're in lockstep. And I think that's, continues to be where we will head more and more. So it's exciting.
2 follow-up questions. First, what does D&T mean?
Oh, digital and technology. Sorry. Sorry about that.
Second, I've actually heard quite a bit about Nadia from Valence. Can you share, just for our audience, a little bit what that tool is? And then also, how are you thinking about measuring the effectiveness of it? Because some of that back-end stuff you can pretty easily see, okay, we're able to do this faster, but how are you measuring that particular tool?
So Nadia is your AI coaching partner. You go on there and it feels a little bit like, when you interact with ChatGPT, in the sense where it feels more personalized. It's you ask a question and Nadia will ask you a series of questions back like a coach would. It'll help you dig in to the problem you're trying to solve or the topic you're wanting to be coached on. It sends you prompts via email and other methods to follow up with you to see how, if you're asking it to help coach on a difficult conversation, it will follow up and say, how did that go? What reflections do you have? So it really acts like a coach that's always on if you want it to be. And that I think is really powerful to be able to go back to that AI assistant in a way where it can remember what your challenges are. It can uniquely start to read how you respond or how you would guide the tool. And so it becomes deeply personalized. We are measuring right now for adoption. So we're really paying attention to how many people are using it and to what depth. Like, are they using it with some frequency? And that's where we're at so far. We certainly are getting some manager and employee testimonials to see how we're doing, but we're still pretty early in the journey. We've had enough of a proof point of usage that we're going to keep going. But I would say all signs right now look pretty good in terms of its effectiveness.
Kind of a follow-up question to that. You told us how you're using AI now. Where do you think it's going to go? What's the biggest impact you think it'll have in the next 12 to 24 months?
I think the advancements of AI and performance enablement will only amplify. So I think as we start to learn the role of agents across our enterprise, how it enables process, how it enables the tasks we have to do on a day-to-day, or just simply even finding what we need when we need it, That's where I see it going in the near term. And then the thing about AI is sometimes I will learn new things about what's possible and it just blows my mind. So I'm sure in 6 months' time, I would give you a remarkably different answer. But I do think that us setting some foundations now will set us up for success with some of the big rocks that will come. What's possible with AI, how it will impact commerce and business and talent. And what I found really interesting about the talk she gave to our leadership was that AI is like a calculator in the sense where calculator, if you don't know math, is just like a brick. And so AI is similar. Like if you don't understand the foundations, you're not going to be able to understand like what else is coming. I myself, as a learning leader, have so much to learn on this. I've got some really great team members who are like really deep in it and they're doing a brilliant job. But we have a big journey ahead. So it's going to be fun to see what comes of all of this.
Thank you for that. So we want to start to wrap up a little bit. And one question I have for you is, what's one thing you're learning right now?
One thing I'm learning right now as a leader is how to lead through change and uncertainty. So like every organization, there's a lot transforming in our context, in our organization, in our environments. And so I've had the opportunity to go to a couple of sessions with a really brilliant mentor named Sachi. And they do a lot of change leadership sessions. I, about a year ago, went through a 2-day session where they talked about technical and adaptive challenges, polarities, how you lead through those things with your team. And I draw on that in my personal and professional life all the time. And so whether you're going through a big change or a little change, I have really found that type of focus and really understanding, how people respond to change, how they navigate through it. And then as a leader, how you support and lead through it is really important. And I would say that I'm definitely still learning how to navigate that because the change is constant. But I'm finding that that type of coaching and guidance has been really helpful as I work through it and try to improve those skills.
Christine, thank you for being with us today. It's been just a really great conversation. We always wrap with what we call our purpose question, which is, why do you do the work that you do?
Well, thank you for having me. It's been really a pleasure to talk to both of you. I would tell you that I do this work because I really believe that we have the power to change people's lives. When we can build the confidence and the skills that people need to succeed at work and to support themselves, it's really powerful. And I feel really lucky to be a part of something that allows people to really thrive and build a life for themselves. And so I think sometimes we all need a reminder that's really what we do. And I'm proud of that.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Christine.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.